Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. The company sent me to Indianapolis in early October for a 3-day training seminar on their new inventory system. I'm an assistant manager at a sporting goods store in Ohio, and corporate decided all of us needed hands-on experience with the software before the holiday rush. They booked us at the Travelers Inn off Interstate 70, one of those budget chains where the carpets are permanently stained and the ice machine sounds like a diesel engine. I didn't mind much. After 12-hour shifts on my feet, anywhere with a bed and hot water would do. Plus, I was getting paid overtime just to sit in a conference room and click through PowerPoint slides. The hotel sat between a truck stop and a 24-hour diner, surrounded by warehouses and distribution centers. Not exactly scenic, but I wasn't there for sightseeing. That Tuesday night, I got back to my room around 9:30 after grabbing dinner with some co-workers at the diner next door. Room 118, ground floor facing the parking lot. I remember because I could see my rental car, a white Nissan Altima, parked right outside my window. The room smelled like old cigarettes despite being non-smoking, and the air conditioner rattled like marbles in a tin can. But I was exhausted from 8 hours of software tutorials. I took a shower, called my husband Brian to tell him about my day, then settled in to watch some mindless reality TV. Around 11, I turned everything off and crashed hard. Tomorrow was the last day of training. Then I could drive home and sleep in my own bed again. The parking lot had been pretty full when I closed the curtains. Mostly pickup trucks and older sedans, probably belonging to construction crews and warehouse workers staying long-term. I woke up to voices, angry ones. At first, I thought it was the TV from the room next door. Maybe someone watching an action movie with the volume cranked up. The clock on the nightstand showed 2:47 a.m. in those harsh red numbers. But then the voices got louder, more distinct, and they were coming from outside, not through the walls. Multiple people, men from the sound of it, and they were seriously pissed about something. I could hear car doors slamming, engines revving, that aggressive back and forth that happens when people are about to throw punches. My room was right by the parking lot, remember? So everything was crystal clear through that thin window. I sat up in bed, debating whether to peek through the curtains or just mind my own business. Hotels like this, you learn not to get involved in other people's drama. Then came this sound I'll never forget. Like firecrackers, but deeper, sharper. 3 quick pops, then 2 more. My brain tried to process it as anything else. A car backfiring, someone dropping something heavy, those industrial dumpster lids slamming shut. But deep in my gut, I knew exactly what I was hearing. Gunshots. Real ones, not movie ones. The yelling turned to screaming. Car tires screeched and then more shots. Rapid fire this time, like someone just holding down the trigger. I rolled out of bed and hit the floor, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The carpet was rough against my cheek, smelling like decades of spilled coffee and cleaning chemicals. I could see the bottom of the door from where I was lying, that thin strip of yellow light from the walkway outside. That's when the first bullet hit my door. The wood splintered with this horrible cracking sound, and I actually saw the hole appear, jagged and dark, about 3 feet up from the floor. Then another one punched through the window, and glass exploded everywhere. The curtains jerked like someone had yanked them, and cold October air rushed in. I pressed myself flatter against the floor, trying to become part of it, trying to disappear into that nasty carpet. More shots outside, so many I lost count, and the sounds were different now. Some hollow pops, some thunderous booms like different guns all going off at once. A bullet hit the wall above the bed and I heard it tear through the drywall, sending white dust drifting down like snow. My phone was on the nightstand, might as well have been on the moon. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but lie there with my arms over my head. The chaos outside was insane, men shouting orders or threats, I couldn't tell which. Someone was crying, these awful gurgling sounds that made my chest tight. Engines roared to life, tires squealed, and I heard metal crunching like cars were ramming into each other. Another bullet came through the window and I actually felt it pass over me, this weird zip of displaced air that made every hair on my body stand up. The mirror on the wall shattered, raining down in pieces. I could hear people in other rooms now, someone screaming. Doors slamming, feet pounding on the walkway above me as people on the second floor ran for the stairs. But I stayed frozen on that floor, counting my heartbeats, trying to make myself smaller, wondering if Brian would even know what happened to me if I died in this crappy hotel room in Indianapolis. Everything went quiet so suddenly it was almost worse than the shooting. My ears were ringing, this high-pitched whine that made everything else sound muffled and distant. I stayed on the floor, barely breathing, waiting for it to start again. Outside, a car alarm was going off. That repetitive honking that usually annoys the hell out of you, but right then it was proof that the world still existed. I could smell gunpowder, sharp and acidic, mixing with the cold air coming through the broken window. My legs were starting to cramp from being tensed so tight, and I realized I was grinding my teeth so hard my jaw ached. Slowly, carefully, I lifted my head just enough to look around. The room was destroyed, holes in the walls, glass everywhere, the curtains hanging in shreds. The TV had a bullet hole right through the screen, and there was stuffing from the mattress floating in the air like cotton balls. Then I heard sirens, distant at first but getting louder fast. Police, ambulances, the whole cavalry from the sound of it. Red and blue lights started flashing through what was left of my window, painting everything in these crazy, shifting colors. I finally found the courage to crawl toward the nightstand. Glass crunching under my palms and knees, tiny cuts stinging, but I didn't care. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, even though help was obviously already coming. The operator's voice was so calm, asking if I was injured, telling me to stay low, stay away from windows and doors. I wanted to laugh. My window was gone. My door had holes in it. Where exactly was I supposed to hide? I gave her my room number, told her I was alone, unhurt, but trapped. She stayed on the line, that steady voice keeping me grounded while chaos erupted outside again. Not gunfire this time, but police shouting commands, radios crackling, boots running. For what felt like hours but was probably 20 minutes, I huddled in the corner between the bed and the wall, still on the phone with the 911 operator. She kept asking me questions. Was I bleeding? Could I see anyone outside? Did I hear anyone trying to enter my room? Through the destroyed window I could see cops everywhere, their flashlights sweeping across the parking lot like search beams. There were bodies out there. I could see feet, legs, someone's arm sprawled at an angle that wasn't right. The white rental car next to mine had its windshield spiderwebbed with bullet holes, and there was dark liquid pooling underneath it that I didn't want to think about. An officer finally came to my door, announcing himself loudly before asking if I was okay, if I could open the door. My legs were jelly when I stood up, and I had to lean against the wall to make it to the door. When I opened it, the cop looked like he'd aged 10 years in one night, sweat on his forehead despite the cold, eyes darting everywhere at once. They moved me to the hotel lobby while they processed the scene, gave me one of those metallic emergency blankets that made me look like a baked potato. The lobby was packed with other guests, everyone in pajamas and underwear, some crying, some just staring at nothing. An older woman from room 122 had her arm in a sling. A bullet had grazed her shoulder while she was sleeping. A family with 3 kids huddled together on one couch. The youngest couldn't have been more than 5, clutching a stuffed dinosaur and asking his mom why the fireworks were so loud. The hotel manager, this skinny kid who couldn't have been older than 25, kept apologizing to everyone like he'd personally started the shootout. Paramedics were checking people over, cops were taking statements, and through the glass doors I could see the parking lot transformed into a crime scene. Yellow tape everywhere, numbered markers next to shell casings, photographers documenting everything. A detective interviewed me around 5 a.m., a black woman with gray streaks in her hair who introduced herself as Detective Washington. She was thorough but kind, walking me through every second of what I'd heard and seen. Did I recognize any voices? Had I noticed anything unusual earlier in the evening? Could I identify what types of guns from the sounds? I told her everything I could remember, but it all felt jumbled, like trying to describe a nightmare while you're still half in it. She explained that it had been a drug deal gone wrong, two groups who'd arranged to meet in the parking lot, neither trusting the other, both coming armed. 4 people were dead, 3 more in critical condition at the hospital. The hotel had just been collateral damage, wrong place for all of us staying there. She gave me her card, said I might need to give another statement later, maybe testify if it went to trial. The thought of reliving this in a courtroom made me want to throw up. Corporate put me up in a Marriott downtown for the rest of the night, but I didn't sleep. I sat on that pristine bed in that quiet room and shook for hours. Called Brian at 6 a.m., sobbing so hard he could barely understand me. He wanted to drive down immediately, but I told him I just needed to come home. Skipped the last day of training. Funny how unimportant software tutorials seem after you've been shot at. The rental car company didn't even question why I needed a different vehicle. Guess they saw the news. That drive back to Ohio was the longest 3 hours of my life, jumping at every loud noise, pulling off twice because I was crying too hard to see the road. 2 weeks later, a victim's advocate called to check on me, gave me numbers for counselors who specialize in trauma. I went to a few sessions, and it helped some. The company offered to let me skip any future travel, and I took them up on it. These days, when I hear fireworks or a car backfire, my whole body tenses up. But I'm here, I'm alive, and that's more than 4 people from that parking lot can say. The night shift at the Grandview Hotel was supposed to be easy money. That's what my roommate told me when he got me the job. I was 22, fresh out of college with a useless philosophy degree, and desperate for anything that would help me pay rent while I figured out my life. It was a Thursday in early September, maybe around 2018, and I was only 5 days into the job. The hotel sat right off Highway 41, one of those mid-range places that business travelers used when they didn't want to pay downtown prices. During my training, the manager kept saying the night shift was mostly just staying awake and checking in the occasional late arrival. Nobody mentioned that the panic button under the desk hadn't worked in 3 months, or that the security guard position had been cut from the budget 2 weeks before I started. Around 2:47 a.m., this guy walked through the front doors. I remember the exact time because I just checked my phone, counting down the hours until my shift ended at 6. He looked completely ordinary, maybe mid-30s, wearing a wrinkled polo shirt and khakis like he'd been driving all day. Had one of those rolling suitcases, the kind with the broken wheel that makes that annoying clicking sound on tile floors. His driver's license said Robert Lawson, from somewhere in Missouri. He wanted a single room, paid cash for 3 nights up front, which wasn't unusual for that place. While I was counting his money and getting his keycard ready, he kept tapping his fingers on the counter in this weird rhythm, like he was playing an invisible piano. He asked me twice if I was working alone, which seemed odd, but I figured he was just making conversation. Gave him room 147 on the first floor, right down the hall from the lobby. After he left with his keycard, I went back to scrolling through my phone, trying to stay awake with some mindless YouTube videos. The lobby had these huge windows facing the parking lot, and the fluorescent lights inside made it impossible to see anything outside in the darkness. But we had this old monitor behind the desk, showing feeds from 4 security cameras, one in the parking lot, one in the main hallway, one by the side entrance, and one covering the lobby from behind me. About 10 minutes after Lawson checked in, movement on the parking lot camera caught my eye. He was standing by his car, a beat-up silver sedan parked directly in front of the main entrance. The way he was moving seemed strange, like he was checking if anyone was watching. He opened his trunk and pulled out what looked like a large duffel bag, different from the suitcase he'd brought in earlier. Then he unzipped it right there in the parking lot. The camera quality was terrible, all grainy and black and white, but I could see him pulling something out of that bag. At first I thought it might be a baseball bat or maybe a tire iron, but then he held it up to check something, and the parking lot light hit it just right. It was a shotgun, not a hunting rifle or anything you could maybe explain away. A short, mean-looking shotgun. He loaded something into it. I could see the motion even on that crappy camera, then tucked it under a long coat he pulled from the same bag. My whole body went rigid in that chair. He started walking toward the lobby entrance, and I could see him on the monitor getting bigger and bigger. The front doors were maybe 30 feet from my desk. The only other exit was through the back office, but that led to a hallway that connected right back to the main corridor where he could easily cut me off. I reached under the desk for the panic button, pressing it over and over, knowing it was broken but hoping maybe somehow it would work this time. The automatic doors whooshed open, and Lawson walked back in with that same casual stride, except now I knew what was hidden under his coat. He wasn't pointing anything at me yet, just walked up to the counter like he needed extra towels or something. "Hey, buddy," he said, and his voice was different now, lower and steadier. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to open that register and the safe in the back office. We're going to do this nice and quiet, and you're going to go home with a story to tell instead of a hole in your chest." His hand moved slightly under the coat, adjusting the weight of the gun. The weird thing was how calm he seemed, like he'd done this before, like robbing hotels at 3 a.m. was just another Thursday for him. I nodded, trying to speak, but my throat was completely dry. He smiled then, not a crazy smile, but worse. A practical, businesslike smile that said he'd already thought through every possible outcome of this situation. My mind was racing through my training, but they'd spent exactly 0 minutes on what to do during an armed robbery. The cash register had maybe $200 in it, mostly small bills from people buying snacks from the vending machines. The safe in the back had more, probably a few thousand, but I didn't even know the combination. Only the manager and the senior night auditor knew that, and Gregory, the night auditor, wasn't scheduled until tomorrow. I started moving toward the register, trying to buy time, trying to think. "The safe," I managed to croak out. "I don't have the combination. I'm new. They haven't given it to me yet." Lawson's expression didn't change. He leaned against the counter like we were having a casual conversation about the weather. "That's unfortunate," he said. "For you, I mean. Because I drove a long way for what's in that safe and I'm not leaving empty-handed. So you better start thinking real hard about how to open it, or we're going to have a different kind of conversation." I opened the register, my fingers fumbling with the keys, and started pulling out the cash. While I was doing that, I noticed something on the security monitor. A car had just pulled into the parking lot, a taxi. We sometimes got late arrivals from the airport, and sure enough, I saw an elderly couple getting out, the man pulling luggage from the trunk while the woman counted bills to pay the driver. They were heading straight for the lobby. Lawson must have seen my eyes flick to the monitor because he turned slightly to look at the parking lot through the windows. "Well," he said quietly, "this is about to get interesting." He shifted the shotgun under his coat and moved to the side of the counter where he'd be hidden from view when they first walked in. "You're going to check them in like everything's normal," he whispered. "One wrong word, one weird look, and I start with them, understand?" The automatic doors were already sliding open, and I could hear the woman complaining about the airline losing their bags. The couple approached the desk slowly, the man limping slightly with what looked like a bad knee. They were probably in their 70s, wearing matching Florida vacation shirts with palm trees on them. The woman, Dorothy she said her name was, did all the talking while her husband Harold just stood there looking exhausted. She wanted a room on the ground floor because of Harold's knee, and she kept apologizing for arriving so late, explaining their flight had been delayed 4 hours. The whole time she was talking, I could see Lawson in my peripheral vision, standing just 3 feet away behind that half wall that separated the desk area from the lobby. One step and he'd be visible to them. My voice sounded almost normal as I processed their credit card, but I could feel sweat running down my back, soaking through my uniform shirt. Dorothy kept chatting about their grandchildren in Phoenix, completely unaware that we were one wrong move away from disaster. I handed them their key cards, room 108, the opposite direction from where Lawson had checked in earlier. As soon as they disappeared down the hallway, Lawson stepped back into view. "Good job," he said, like I'd passed some kind of test. "Now, about that safe. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to call your manager. Tell him there's an emergency, maybe a water pipe burst in the back office, flooding everywhere. He needs to come down here right now with the safe combination because important documents are getting soaked." He pulled a cell phone from his pocket and set it on the counter. "Use this one, not the hotel phone. Don't want any recordings." I stared at the phone, knowing this would put my manager Russell in danger too. Russell was a decent guy, had 3 kids, always showed me pictures of his daughter's soccer games. "I can't," I said, surprised by my own words. "He won't believe me." "A water pipe? He'll know something's wrong." Lawson's jaw tightened, the first sign of frustration I'd seen from him. He reached under his coat and I heard the distinctive sound of a shotgun being pumped. Not loud, but unmistakable in the quiet lobby. That's when I remembered something from my second day of training. Russell had mentioned the hotel kept a backup cash deposit in a hidden safe behind the breakfast area, separate from the main safe. It was for emergencies, usually about $5,000 in cash. He'd shown me where it was, but said only to use it if the main safe malfunctioned, and we needed to make change for a big bill or something. The combination was written on a card taped inside the supply closet, which was stupid but typical for this place. "Wait," I said quickly. "There's another safe. Emergency cash. I know where it is and how to open it." Lawson studied my face, probably trying to figure out if I was lying. "How much?" he asked. $5,000, maybe more if they just made a deposit," I said. It was Thursday, so they might have deposited Wednesday's receipts. He considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Show me. And remember, those old folks are still in the building. Would be a shame if I had to go knock on their door." We walked to the breakfast area, me in front, him staying close enough that I could smell the cigarette smoke on his clothes. The breakfast room was creepy at night. All those empty tables and chairs set up for a meal that wouldn't happen for another 3 hours. The coffee machines were turned off, and the waffle makers sat there like metal mouths waiting to be fed. The supply closet was in the back corner, and my key card worked on it thankfully. Inside, behind boxes of paper cups and napkins, was the combination taped to the wall, just like Russell had shown me. EU07-3185, probably someone's birthday. The safe was built into the floor under a piece of loose carpet. As I knelt down to open it, I noticed something else in that closet, a heavy marble rolling pin from when the hotel used to make fresh pastries. It was on the shelf right next to me, covered in dust. Lawson was standing in the doorway, watching the breakfast room entrance, the shotgun now visible under his open coat. This was probably my only chance. My hand was on the safe dial, but I could reach that rolling pin without him noticing if I was careful. The safe clicked open, and there it was. Stacks of 20s and 50s, probably about 6,000 total. More than I'd expected. Lawson glanced down at the money, and for just a second his attention was completely on the cash. I grabbed the marble rolling pin and swung it as hard as I could at his knee, the bad one I'd noticed him favoring when he walked. The crack was horrible, like stepping on a thick branch, and he went down screaming. The shotgun clattered across the floor, sliding under one of the breakfast tables. I didn't even think, just ran. Ran straight through the lobby, past my desk, out the automatic doors into the parking lot. I could hear him screaming behind me, cursing and trying to get up. I made it to my car, a rusty Ford Focus, and fumbled with my keys. Started it on the 3rd try and peeled out of that parking lot faster than I'd ever driven. Called 911 from the road, told them everything. They caught him still in the breakfast room, trying to crawl to the shotgun with his destroyed knee. Turns out Robert Lawson wasn't even his real name, and he'd robbed 2 other hotels in neighboring states the same way. The elderly couple slept through the whole thing. I quit the next day, didn't even go back for my last paycheck. Sometimes I still dream about that breakfast room and the sound his knee made when I hit it. It was the middle of July when my sister Melissa and I decided to drive down to visit our grandmother in Alabama. I was 24 at the time, fresh out of nursing school, and Melissa had just turned 21 that spring. We'd been planning this trip for months, setting aside money from our part-time jobs and coordinating our vacation days. The plan was simple: split the 18-hour drive over 2 days, spend a week with Grandma helping her reorganize the house after Grandpa passed, then drive back home to Michigan. We'd done road trips together before, but this was our first time going this far south, just the two of us. The excitement of adventure mixed with the responsibility of being there for family made everything feel significant somehow. We'd been driving since dawn that first day, taking turns at the wheel every few hours, singing along to Melissa's meticulously curated road trip playlist. Around 9 that evening, exhaustion hit us both like a brick wall. We started seeing signs for lodging every few miles along Route 65, each promising clean rooms and continental breakfast. The Blue Ridge Motor Lodge caught our attention with its flickering neon vacancy sign and a price that wouldn't destroy our budget, $49 a night. The place sat about 200 yards from the highway, surrounded by nothing but dense woods and a gravel parking lot that crunched under our tires. The main office was a tiny building separate from the long, single-story row of rooms that stretched into the darkness. An older woman with reading glasses perched on her nose checked us in, handed us a key, attached to a plastic diamond-shaped tag with Room 12 etched into it, and mentioned she'd be leaving at 10 since her replacement called in sick. Room 12 was at the far end of the building, the last door before the parking lot dissolved into complete darkness. The exterior light above our door was burnt out, leaving only the distant glow from the office and a single street lamp near the ice machine to navigate by. Inside, the room smelled like old carpet and that generic cleaning product every cheap motel seems to use, somewhere between pine and bleach. 2 double beds with burgundy comforters took up most of the space, separated by a nightstand with a lamp that made a buzzing sound when you turned it on. Melissa immediately claimed the bed nearest the bathroom while I dropped our bags near the door. We'd packed light, just 2 duffel bags in our purses, planning to do laundry at Grandma's place. The AC unit beneath the window rattled to life when I adjusted the thermostat, drowning out most of the highway noise but adding its own mechanical rhythm to the room. After quick showers and changing into pajamas, me in an oversized University of Michigan shirt and shorts, Melissa in her collection of mismatched tank top and plaid pants, we settled in for the night. It was around 11 when we finally turned off the lights, both of us scrolling through our phones in the darkness, too wired from the drive to fall asleep immediately. The room's curtains were those thick, rubberized blackout kind, but they didn't quite meet in the middle, leaving a 2-inch gap that let in a sliver of parking lot light. I remember lying there, listening to the AC cycle on and off, occasionally hearing a car pass on the distant highway, thinking about what we'd do with Grandma the next day. Melissa's breathing had gotten steady and deep. She could fall asleep anywhere, anytime, a skill I'd always envied. That's when I heard the footsteps outside, heavy and deliberate, stopping right in front of our door. The footsteps just stood there, no knock, no voice, nothing. Through that gap in the curtains, I could make out the shadow of someone's legs. Then came the sound that made every muscle in my body tense up. The door handle slowly turning. Click, click, click. 3 deliberate attempts, testing if we'd locked it. Thank God we had. I reached over and grabbed Melissa's arm, whispering her name, but she just mumbled something incoherent and rolled over. The handle stopped moving, but the shadow didn't leave. Whoever it was just stood there, perfectly still, for what must have been 2 or 3 minutes but felt like hours. Part of me wanted to call out, ask who was there, but something deep in my gut told me to stay quiet. Maybe they had the wrong room. Maybe they were drunk. The shadow finally moved away, footsteps heading toward the parking lot. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in minutes and reached for my phone to check the time. 11:17 p.m. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. People get confused at motels all the time, especially late at night. All those identical doors, barely visible room numbers. but I couldn't relax. Every little sound made me jump. The ice machine dropping cubes, a door slamming somewhere down the row, the AC kicking back on. 20 minutes passed, then 30. I was just starting to drift off when the footsteps returned. This time they weren't slow or hesitant. They were confident, purposeful. The handle turned again, more aggressively this time, rattling against the lock. Then came the knocking. Not polite, tentative knocks, but heavy, insistent pounding that shook the thin door in its frame. "Housekeeping," a man's voice called out, rough and slurred. At nearly midnight? No way. Melissa shot up in bed, instantly alert, her eyes wide in the darkness. We looked at each other, both of us knowing this wasn't right. "We don't need anything," I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. The pounding stopped. Then, in a completely different tone, lower and clearer, "Just open the door, I know you're awake." Melissa grabbed her phone and immediately dialed 911 while I scrambled to push the dresser against the door. The operator answered just as the man outside started kicking the door, each impact making the cheap wood flex inward. "We're at the Blue Ridge Motor Lodge on Route 65, Room 12. Someone's trying to break in," Melissa practically screamed into the phone. The operator said units were on the way, but the nearest patrol was at least 15 minutes out. 15 minutes. The kicking stopped suddenly, replaced by something worse, the sound of metal scraping against metal near the lock. He was trying to jimmy it open. I ran to the window, yanking back the curtains to see if we could escape that way, but it was one of those safety windows that only opened about 4 inches at the top. Through the glass, I could see him now. A large man in a dark jacket, maybe 6'2", with a baseball cap pulled low. He had something in his hand, working it into the door frame near the lock mechanism. The parking lot was completely empty except for our car and an old pickup truck I hadn't noticed before, parked crooked across 2 spaces. The scraping stopped, and for a moment, everything was quiet. Then he spoke again, his mouth close to the door. "Your car has Michigan plates. Long way from home. No one knows you're here, do they?" That's when real panic set in. He'd been watching us, planning this. Melissa was crying now, still on with 911, and I was trying to think of anything we could use as weapons. The lamp was bolted to the nightstand. The hangers were those useless rounded ones. Then I remembered the bottle of mace in my purse. Dad had insisted I carry it. I grabbed it just as we heard a crack. He'd gotten something through the door frame. The lock was starting to give. Without thinking, I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Fire! Fire! Help! There's a fire!" Something I'd read once about how people respond more to fire than to calls for help. Melissa joined in, both of us screaming. A door opened somewhere down the row, then another. "What's going on?" someone yelled. The man at our door cursed, something guttural and angry, and the pressure on the door suddenly stopped. We could hear him running, heavy boots on concrete, heading toward the parking lot. I rushed to the window again and watched him sprint to the pickup truck. But instead of leaving immediately, he sat there in the driver's seat, engine running, lights off, just watching our room. Other guests had come outside now, an elderly couple from room 8, a woman with 2 kids from room 10, all looking confused and alarmed. The woman was on her phone, probably calling 911 too. But the man in the truck wasn't leaving. He was waiting. Melissa was explaining to the operator that he was still in the parking lot, and they told us to stay in the room, keep the door barricaded. Then, maybe 3 minutes later, he did something that still makes me sick to think about. He got out of the truck, walked calmly to the elderly couple, and started talking to them, gesturing toward our room. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but he was pointing at our door, shaking his head, looking concerned, playing the victim somehow. The old man seemed to be buying it, nodding along. That's when I cracked the window and yelled, "He tried to break into our room. Don't believe him. We called the police." The man's head snapped toward our window, and even from 40 feet away, I could see his expression change, from fake concern to pure rage. He said something quick to the elderly couple and started walking back toward our room, not running this time, but striding with this terrifying determination. The elderly woman pulled her husband back inside their room. The mother grabbed her kids and disappeared too. It was just him, us, and the empty parking lot again. He came right up to our window this time, close enough that I could see he had pale eyes, maybe gray or light blue, and a scar that ran through his left eyebrow. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice calm but with this underlying threat that made my skin prickle. "I was just trying to help. Your friend texted me, said you needed help." "What friend?" We hadn't told anyone where we were staying. Before I could respond, he pulled out a phone and held it up to the window, showing a text conversation I couldn't quite read in the darkness. "See? She sent me your room number. Told me to come check on you." Neither of us had texted anyone. Melissa, still on with 911, was shaking her head frantically. This man was completely delusional, or an incredibly practiced liar. That's when we heard the sirens in the distance. The man's whole demeanor shifted instantly. He backed away from the window, that fake concerned expression completely gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. "Wrong room," he said flatly, like he was talking to himself more than us. Must have been the wrong room. He walked back to his truck with this unnatural calmness, taking his time like he had nothing to hide. But just before getting in, he turned back and looked directly at me through the window. He didn't say anything, just stared for maybe 5 seconds, like he was memorizing my face. Then he got in the truck and drove away, no rush, no squealing tires, just pulled out of the parking lot and headed north on the frontage road, away from the approaching sirens. I kept watching until his taillights disappeared into the darkness, terrified he might circle back. The police arrived about 2 minutes after he left, 2 patrol cars with lights flashing, filling the parking lot with red and blue. Melissa finally stopped shaking enough to unlock the door and let them in. The officers took our statements, examined the door frame where he'd damaged it trying to break in, and put out a description of the truck and the man. They found scratches and tool marks on the lock mechanism, confirming someone had definitely tried to force entry. One officer, a younger guy named Officer Daniels, told us this was the 3rd report they'd had in 2 months about attempted break-ins at motels along this stretch of highway, always targeting women traveling alone or in pairs. They never caught the guy. The motel owner, who showed up about an hour later in pajamas and a windbreaker, moved us to a room right next to the office and had his son stay in the office all night to keep watch. We didn't sleep. We sat on one bed together, backs against the headboard, taking turns staying alert while the other dozed off for minutes at a time. At first light, around 5:30 a.m., we packed up, got in our car, and drove the remaining 8 hours to Grandma's house without stopping except for gas. We never found out who that man was or what he really wanted, though I can guess. I still think about those pale eyes sometimes, that calculated way he tried different tactics to get to us. We took a different route home, flying instead of driving, and I haven't stayed in a roadside motel since. I'm a traveling nurse, and last month I was driving through Nevada on my way to a new assignment in Colorado. It was getting late, around 11 p.m., and I'd already been on the road for 9 hours straight. My eyes were burning from staring at the endless stretch of highway, and I knew I needed to stop for the night. I pulled off at an exit that had a cluster of motels and gas stations. Nothing fancy, just the typical roadside setup you see in the middle of nowhere. I picked the Desert View Motel because it had the most cars in the parking lot, figuring that meant it was at least decent enough for other travelers. The place looked tired but clean, with faded turquoise paint peeling off the walls and a flickering neon sign that buzzed like angry wasps. I was exhausted, planning to grab maybe 6 hours of sleep before hitting the road again at dawn. The woman at the front desk had bleached blonde hair with dark roots showing and chewed gum while she processed my credit card. She handed me a key attached to a plastic diamond-shaped tag with the number 217 on it, told me ice machines were at the end of each floor, and went back to watching something on her phone. Room 217 was on the 2nd floor, 3 doors from the stairwell. The hallway carpet had this nauseating pattern of burgundy swirls that probably hadn't been replaced since the 80s. I remembered dragging my suitcase past room 215, hearing a TV blaring through the thin walls. Some game show with lots of applause and bells ringing. When I got into my room, it smelled like old cigarettes masked by cheap air freshener, that artificial cherry scent that makes your throat itch. I dropped my bag, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed on the bed without even pulling back the covers, just needing to close my eyes for a minute before I'd get up to shower. Maybe 20 minutes later, I woke up to voices coming through the wall from room 219. At first, it was just muffled conversation, a man and woman talking, nothing unusual. I figured they were just another couple passing through, maybe arguing about directions or where to eat tomorrow. But then the man's voice got louder, sharper, and I could make out some of the words. Ugly things, calling her stupid, worthless, saying she'd ruined everything again. The woman's voice was quieter, pleading, trying to calm him down. I've worked in enough emergency rooms to recognize that tone, that careful way people talk when they're trying not to set someone off. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake, listening as his voice kept escalating. Then I heard the first crash, like something heavy hitting the wall, and the woman let out this strangled cry that made every hair on my arm stand up. The next few minutes were pure chaos on the other side of that wall. More crashes, the sound of glass breaking, furniture being thrown around. The woman was crying now, begging him to stop, and I could hear the terror in her voice. I grabbed my phone and called 911, but the dispatcher said they were 40 minutes out. Apparently, there were only 2 patrol cars covering this entire stretch of highway. 40 minutes. I couldn't just sit there for 40 minutes listening to this, so I called the front desk, thinking maybe they had some kind of security, or at least they could intervene somehow. The same gum-chewing woman answered, sounding annoyed that I'd interrupted her show. I told her what was happening, that someone was getting hurt in room 219, that she needed to do something right now. She sighed like I was asking her to move mountains, said she'd send someone up to check on it. About 2 minutes later, I heard heavy footsteps in the hallway and a knock on their door. A man's voice, probably maintenance or security, asked if everything was all right in there. The fighting stopped immediately. There was this eerie silence for maybe 10 seconds. Then the abuser answered, his voice completely different now, calm, friendly even, saying they were just watching TV and sorry if it was too loud. The maintenance guy must have bought it because I heard him walking away. As soon as those footsteps faded, the abuser started yelling again. But this time, it wasn't at the woman. He was ranting about how someone had called to complain, how some nosy bitch had tried to get him in trouble. My whole body went rigid when I realized he was talking about me. Then he said something that made my chest tighten. It had to be the room next door. I'm gonna find out which one. Everything happened fast after that. I heard their door slam open so hard it bounced off the wall. Heavy footsteps in the hallway, going first to room 221 on the other side. He pounded on that door, but no one answered. They must have been empty. Then those footsteps came back, stopped right outside my door. The pounding started so hard I thought the door might actually crack. "I know you're in there," he yelled, his voice raw with rage. "You think you can call the cops on me? You think you can stick your nose where it doesn't belong?" His fists kept hammering the door, and he started kicking it too. The cheap motel door was shaking in its frame, and I could see the deadbolt straining against the wood. I backed away, grabbed my car keys and phone, trying to think straight while this maniac was trying to break down my door. The woman from 219 was in the hallway now too. I could hear her crying, begging him to come back to the room, telling him he was making things worse. I called 911 again, practically screaming at the dispatcher that he was trying to break into my room, that I needed help now. She said units were en route, still 25 minutes out, and asked if I could get to a safe location. Safe location? I was on the second floor with only one stairwell nearby, and he was right outside my door. The window in my room had one of those safety stops that only let it open about 4 inches. No way I could squeeze through. The bathroom had no window at all, just a ventilation fan that rattled when you turned on the light. I could hear the wood around the deadbolt starting to splinter. He must have been over 6 feet tall and built like a linebacker because the whole door frame was bending with each impact. The woman outside was screaming now, telling him the cops were coming, pulling on his arm, trying to get him away from my door. I heard him shove her hard. She hit the opposite wall with a thud and went quiet for a moment. That's when I made a decision that probably saved my life. I grabbed the desk chair, one of those heavy wooden ones, and wedged it under the door handle as an extra barrier. Then I called the front desk again. The woman answered on the first ring this time. She must have heard the commotion even from downstairs. I told her I was going to make a run for my car, that she needed to be ready to lock the lobby doors behind me if he followed. She started to protest, but I hung up and got ready. I put my car key between my fingers like I'd learned in a self-defense class years ago, tucked my phone in my pocket, and stood by the door listening. He was still pounding, but I could hear him getting winded, his breathing heavy and ragged. The woman was back on her feet, pulling on him again, and for just a moment he stepped back from my door to push her away again. That was my chance. I yanked the chair away, turned the deadbolt, and threw the door open. He was about 3 feet away, his back to me as he grabbed the woman by her shoulders. She had a swollen eye already turning purple, blood running from her nose onto a Garfield nightshirt that was ripped at the collar. The second he heard my door, he spun around and I got my first clear look at him. Maybe 35, unshaven, wearing jeans and a wife beater stained with what looked like beer. His eyes were bloodshot and wild, pupils dilated huge. The hallway reeked of alcohol and sweat. For half a second, we just stared at each other, then I bolted toward the stairwell. I could hear him right behind me, his work boots thundering on that ugly carpet. I hit the stairs, taking them 3 at a time, using the railing to swing myself around the landing. My ankle twisted on the last step, but I kept going, adrenaline blocking out the pain. The parking lot was darker than I remembered, only a few yellow streetlights creating pools of dim light between long shadows. My car was parked in the middle section, a blue Nissan Altima that had never looked so beautiful. I could hear him burst through the stairwell door behind me, cursing and screaming threats about what he'd do when he caught me. The asphalt was still warm from the day's heat, and I remember the smell of oil and hot rubber as I sprinted between the cars. Other guests must have heard the commotion because I saw curtains moving in several windows, faces peering out, but nobody came to help. I made it to my car, fumbled with the key fob, and heard that blessed beep as the doors unlocked. I threw myself inside, slammed the locks just as he reached the car. He started pounding on the driver's side window with both fists, his face inches from the glass, spit flying as he screamed at me. The window was vibrating so hard I thought it might shatter. My fingers were trembling so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. He moved to the front of the car, slamming his palms on the hood, then picked up a rock from the landscaping and raised it over his head. That's when I got the engine started, threw it in reverse, and floored it. He had to jump back to avoid getting hit, and the rock went flying somewhere in the dark. I spun the wheel hard, tires screeching on the asphalt, and gunned it toward the exit. In my rearview mirror, I could see him running after me for a few seconds before giving up, standing in the middle of the parking lot with his arms raised, still yelling. The woman had come outside too, standing by the stairwell door, hunched over and holding her ribs. I wanted to stop for her, to take her with me, but I knew if I stopped he'd catch up. I had to leave her there, and that still eats at me. I drove straight to a well-lit gas station about 2 miles down the highway, and parked right in front of the doors where the cameras could see everything. Called 911 again, told them where I was, what had happened. While I waited, I called the motel and asked about the woman. The desk clerk said she'd gone back to the room with him, that they'd refused to open the door when the maintenance guy went back up. The police finally showed up about 15 minutes later, took my statement, said they'd send units to the motel. I found out later they arrested him for domestic battery and criminal threats, but the woman wouldn't press charges. She left with him the next morning. I think about her sometimes, wonder if she ever got away, if she's even still alive. I never stayed at a roadside motel again after that night. I'll drive exhausted for hours just to reach a proper hotel in a populated area. The sound of someone pounding on a door, any door, still makes me nauseous. I know I did the right thing by calling for help, but I learned that sometimes doing the right thing puts a target on your back. I was 34 when it happened, just another February night in 2017. I'd been selling medical equipment for about 6 years by then, covering most of the Midwest territory. The job meant spending at least 15 nights a month in different hotels, everything from decent chains to those sketchy motels where the ice machine never works, and the carpet has stains you don't want to think about. That particular Monday, I'd checked into a mid-range place just outside Minneapolis, one of those generic 3-story buildings with exterior corridors and doors that face the parking lot. Room 237, second floor, right next to the stairwell. I remember being exhausted after driving 7 hours from my previous appointment in Des Moines, barely managing to grab a burger from the drive-thru before collapsing into bed around 11. The digital clock on the nightstand read 2:47 a.m. when I heard it, the distinctive click of a keycard reader accepting a card. You know that mechanical sound, the one that's followed by the green light and the heavy clunk of the lock disengaging. Except I hadn't ordered room service, hadn't called for anything, and housekeeping sure as hell doesn't come around at that hour. My brain tried to rationalize it at first, that foggy, half-awake state where you're not sure what's real. Maybe someone had the wrong room. Maybe it was the maintenance guy checking something. But then I heard the door handle turn. That slow, deliberate movement like someone was trying to be quiet. The door pushed open inch by inch, and the hallway light created this thin vertical line that gradually widened across the carpet. I stayed completely still, every muscle in my body tensing up like a coiled spring. Through barely open eyelids, I watched a figure step into my room. A man, probably 6 feet tall, wearing what looked like a maintenance uniform, though something about it seemed wrong even in the dim light. He had this peculiar way of moving, taking these measured steps like he was counting them, and his head kept tilting at odd angles, as if he was listening for something. The door clicked shut behind him, and suddenly the room was dark again, except for the faint glow from the alarm clock and the thin strip of light under the bathroom door I'd left on. He just stood there for what must have been 30 seconds, but felt like hours, and I could hear his breathing. Not heavy or labored, but deliberate, controlled, like someone practicing meditation. The strangest part was how methodical he was. He didn't rush to grab my wallet on the dresser or go for my laptop bag propped against the wall. Instead, he moved to the corner near the window and just waited. I could make out his silhouette against the curtains, standing perfectly still like he was part of the furniture. My phone was on the nightstand, maybe 18 inches from my right hand, but reaching for it would mean moving, and moving would mean he'd know I was awake. The rational part of my brain kept screaming at me to do something, to yell, to jump up, to grab the lamp and defend myself. But there was something about the way he carried himself, this eerie calmness that made me think he might have a knife or worse tucked into that uniform. Then he started doing something I'll never forget. He pulled out what looked like a small notebook and a pen light, the kind doctors use to check your pupils. The beam was narrow, focused, and he began scanning the room with it systematically, first the walls, then the floor, occasionally pausing to write something down. The light passed over my face twice, and both times I fought every instinct to flinch or close my eyes tighter. He spent extra time examining the area around my suitcase, even crouching down to inspect the zipper pulls without actually touching anything. When he aimed the light at the mirror above the dresser, I caught a glimpse of his face in the reflection. Mid-40s maybe, clean-shaven, with these deep-set eyes that seemed completely focused on whatever he was documenting. He had this small scar running through his left eyebrow, the kind you'd get from a bar fight or a childhood accident. After about 10 minutes of this bizarre inspection, he moved closer to the bed. I could smell him now, not body odor or cologne, but this weird chemical smell, like industrial cleaner mixed with something metallic. He stood at the foot of the bed, and I heard the notebook pages rustling as he wrote more notes. My left foot was maybe 6 inches from the edge of the mattress, and I became hyper-aware of it, terrified that any involuntary twitch would give me away. He started mumbling to himself, too quiet for me to make out the words. But the tone was conversational, like he was explaining something to someone who wasn't there. Then he did something that made my heart pound so hard I was sure he'd hear it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out what looked like a hotel keycard, but it had all these wires attached to it, connected to some kind of small electronic device. He walked back to the door and inserted the modified keycard into the reader. Instead of the usual beep, there was this series of rapid clicks, and then he opened the door slightly and wedged something under it. Looked like a rubber doorstop. The hallway was empty from what I could see, just the ugly geometric pattern carpet and the ice machine humming in the distance. He left the door cracked open about 2 inches and returned to his spot by the window, but this time he was facing the bed directly. I kept my breathing shallow, counting each inhale and exhale to keep them regular, fighting the urge to gulp air as panic crept up my throat. The worst part was not knowing what he was waiting for. Was someone else coming? Was he going to stand there all night? The uncertainty was eating at me, making every second stretch into eternity. That's when I heard footsteps in the hallway, multiple sets, moving quickly but quietly. Through the crack in the door, I saw shadows passing by, and then someone whispered something sharp and urgent. The man in my room responded with 3 distinct knocks on the wall, 2 quick, 1 slow, like some kind of signal. Suddenly, he moved with purpose, sliding something under my mattress near the headboard. I felt the mattress shift slightly from whatever he'd placed there, something flat and rigid. He then grabbed his notebook, shoved it in his pocket, and headed for the door. But before leaving, he turned back and stared directly at me for what must have been 5 full seconds. Even in the darkness, I could tell he was looking right at my face, and I used every ounce of willpower to keep my eyes steady, my breathing regular, playing dead better than I'd ever done as a kid. The door clicked shut and I heard multiple footsteps moving away down the corridor, then down the stairs. I stayed frozen for another 5 minutes, maybe 10. I couldn't tell anymore. My whole body was trembling now, adrenaline making my muscles twitch and jump. When I finally worked up the courage to move, I grabbed my phone and immediately called 911. While waiting for the police, I turned on every light in the room and checked under the mattress. What I found made no sense at all. A manila envelope sealed with a single word written on it: payment. Inside was exactly $3,000 in $100 bills and a business card with no name. Just a phone number with an area code I didn't recognize. The bills looked real, felt real, even had consecutive serial numbers. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Was this some kind of drop? Had they used my room as a dead drop for something illegal? The police arrived within 15 minutes. 2 officers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else at 4 in the morning. They took my statement, examined the room, bagged the money and card as evidence. One of them, Officer Hoffman, a guy about my age with tired eyes, told me they'd been having issues with identity theft rings using hotels for their operations. Apparently, these groups would break into rooms, plant evidence or contraband, then retrieve it later to avoid direct handoffs. But when they ran the keycard logs, things got weird. According to the hotel's system, no one had accessed my room after I checked in. The manager, this nervous woman named Angela who kept apologizing, swore their system was foolproof, that every entry was logged. She even showed us the computer records. According to their data, my door never opened between 11 p.m. when I entered and 4:15 a.m. when the police arrived. They moved me to another room for the rest of the night, but I didn't sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about that modified keycard device, how it apparently bypassed the hotel's system completely. Around 6 a.m., Officer Hoffman called me with an update that made everything even stranger. The phone number on the card? It belonged to a medical equipment company in Illinois, the same company I was supposed to visit for a sales pitch that afternoon. When they contacted the company, the owner, a man named Douglas Crawford, claimed he'd never heard of me and had no appointments scheduled with any sales reps. But here's the thing. I had emails from him, dating back 3 weeks, setting up this exact meeting. When I showed the police the emails, they found that the domain was spoofed. The whole correspondence was fake. Someone had been planning this for weeks, maybe months, orchestrating an elaborate scheme to get me to that specific hotel on that specific night. The police kept the money as evidence and told me they'd investigate further, but I could tell from their expressions they were as baffled as I was. I canceled all my appointments for the week and drove straight home to Wisconsin, checking my mirrors constantly, paranoid that someone was following me. Over the next few days, I discovered more inconsistencies. Charges on my company credit card for hotels I'd never stayed at, signed receipts with my signature for restaurants in cities I'd never visited, all from the past month. My company launched an internal investigation, but nothing ever came of it. The charges were reversed, the police case went cold, and officially, according to the hotel's records, no one ever entered my room that night. 6 months later, I quit that job and found work that didn't require travel. I still don't know what I was really caught up in that night, whether I was a random target or specifically chosen, whether that man knew I was awake the whole time. All I know is that sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night, I still hear that sound, the slow, deliberate turn of a door handle in the darkness. I worked the night shift at the Sunset Lodge for 6 years before everything changed. It was March of 2022, and I was 34, living in a small town in Montana where nothing exciting ever happened. The lodge sat right off Interstate 90, one of those budget places that truckers and families on road trips would use for a quick overnight stay. My job was simple enough: check people in, handle complaints about the ice machine, occasionally deal with drunk guests trying to sneak into the pool after hours. I lived in a studio apartment 5 minutes away, had a routine that never changed, and honestly thought I'd probably work there until I retired. The pay wasn't great, but the job was easy, and my manager, Frank, was decent enough to work for. Most nights I'd bring a book or watch Netflix on my phone during the dead hours between 2 and 5 a.m. when nobody ever showed up. Everything started with a news alert on my phone during a particularly slow shift in early April. A woman had been found dead at the Riverside Inn, about 40 miles east of us along the same interstate. The article didn't have many details, just that housekeeping had discovered her body when she didn't check out on time. I remember thinking it was sad, maybe a heart attack or something, and went back to my crossword puzzle. But then Frank called an emergency staff meeting the next afternoon, which was weird because he never called meetings. He looked different that day. His usually relaxed face was tight with worry, and he kept running his hand through his thinning hair while he talked. Apparently, the woman at the Riverside hadn't died of natural causes. She'd been murdered, and the police were telling all the hotels along I-90 to be extra vigilant about security. 2 weeks later, it happened again. The Pine Valley Motel, 60 miles west of us this time. Another woman, found in her room with no signs of forced entry, no struggle, nothing stolen. The news said both rooms had been cleaned so thoroughly that investigators couldn't find a single fingerprint that didn't belong to hotel staff. That detail stuck with me because I'd seen how people leave hotel rooms. They're usually disasters. Towels everywhere, trash overflowing, sheets twisted up like tornadoes hit them. But these rooms were spotless, like someone had spent hours scrubbing every surface with bleach. The victims were both traveling alone, both had checked in late at night, and both had paid in cash. The police started calling it a pattern, and suddenly every hotel worker along I-90 was on edge, watching every guest like they might be either the next victim or the killer. My shift on that Friday in late April started like any other. I got to work at 11 p.m., relieved Judith, who worked the evening shift, and settled in for what I expected would be another boring night of fighting to stay awake. The lodge had maybe 15 guests total. I could see it on our computer system. Room 106 had the Sinclair family with their 3 kids. 118 had an elderly couple who'd checked in around dinner time, and there were a handful of truckers scattered throughout the first floor. Around 1 a.m., a man walked through our front door, and I'll never forget the way he moved. It wasn't anything obviously wrong, but there was this calculated precision to his steps, like he was measuring each movement before he made it. He wore a plain gray jacket, dark jeans, and carried a simple black duffel bag that looked brand new, not a single scuff mark on it. He approached the desk with this peculiar smile, not friendly, not unfriendly, just perfectly neutral, like someone had taught him the exact angle his mouth should make to appear approachable. His eyes were pale blue, almost gray in the fluorescent lighting, and they never quite focused on my face when he talked. Instead, he seemed to be looking at a spot just past my left ear. "I need a room for the night," he said, and his voice had this flat quality to it, each word pronounced too carefully, like English wasn't his first language even though he had no accent. When I asked for his ID and credit card, he pulled out a wallet that was also brand new, the leather still stiff, no worn edges, no receipts or photos tucked inside. His driver's license said James Whitmore from Pennsylvania, but the picture barely looked like him. Not different enough that I could refuse it, but just enough that it made me pause. I gave him room 214, second floor at the far end of the hallway. As I handed him the key card, our fingers briefly touched, and his skin was oddly cold and completely dry, like shaking hands with someone wearing latex gloves. He thanked me with that same measured voice and headed for the elevator, his footsteps eerily silent on our worn carpet. I watched him on our security monitor as he went up to the second floor, and here's where things got strange. Instead of going straight to his room, he stood in the hallway for almost 5 minutes, just standing there, not checking his phone, not looking around, just standing perfectly still facing the wall. Then, as if someone had flipped a switch, he suddenly moved again, walked to his door, and disappeared inside. The whole thing made me uncomfortable enough that I decided to do something I'd never done before in 6 years. I started watching the security cameras more closely. Around 2:30 a.m., a woman checked in. She was maybe 40, traveling alone, looked exhausted from a long drive. She wore a wrinkled business suit and kept yawning while I processed her registration. Her name was Diana Morrison, heading to Seattle for a conference, and she asked specifically for a quiet room away from the elevator. I had rooms available on the first floor, but something made me hesitate about putting her on the second floor near that man. Call it intuition or paranoia from all the recent news, but I gave her room 108 downstairs. She paid in cash, mentioned her credit cards were maxed out from business expenses, and headed to her room pulling a small red suitcase behind her. I went back to monitoring the cameras, switching between different views every few minutes. The man in 214 hadn't left his room, no lights showing under his door, nothing unusual, but I kept watching anyway. At exactly 3:15 a.m., I saw him emerge from his room on the monitor. He was wearing different clothes now, a black jacket and baseball cap that obscured his face from the cameras. But it was definitely him. I recognized that strange, measured walk. He didn't take the elevator this time. Instead, he used the stairs at the far end of the hallway, the ones that led down to the side exit near the parking lot. I switched camera views and watched him walk across the lot, but he didn't go to any car. He just walked to the edge where our property met the woods, stood there for maybe 30 seconds, then turned around and came back inside through the same door. This time, though, he didn't go back to his room. He went to the vending machine area on the first floor and stood there, not buying anything, just standing in that same unnaturally still way. From that position, I realized he had a clear view down the hallway where Diana Morrison's room was located. My mouth went dry as I watched him stand there for 20 minutes straight, never moving, never shifting his weight, just watching that hallway like a statue. I picked up the phone to call Frank, then put it down. What would I say? That a guest was acting weird by the vending machines? That wasn't illegal. I couldn't call the cops because someone gave me bad vibes. But then I remembered something from Frank's emergency meeting. The police had said both previous victims had called the front desk in the middle of the night to report someone trying their door handle. Both times, when security checked, nobody was there. I pulled up our door access log on the computer, something I'd only learned how to do during training but never actually used. Room 214 showed multiple exit and entry records, but what caught my eye was something else. The system showed key card attempts at 3 different rooms on the first floor. All declined because his card only worked for 214. He'd been trying to get into other rooms. I immediately called the police. While the phone rang, I kept my eyes glued to the monitors, watching the man still standing by the vending machines. The dispatcher answered, and I tried to keep my voice steady as I explained the situation, the recent murders, the strange guest, the attempted entries into other rooms. She said she'd send a patrol car to check things out, maybe 15 minutes. I hung up and looked back at the screen, but he was gone. My heart started pounding as I frantically switched between camera views. Nothing in the hallways, nothing in the parking lot, nothing in the stairwells. Then I heard it, the soft ding of the elevator arriving at the lobby, the elevator I could see on my screen, which showed it was empty. But I heard those doors open and close right there in the lobby with me. The sound came from maybe 20 feet away, but there was nobody there. I stood up from my chair, grabbing the baseball bat Frank kept under the desk, and that's when all the lights in the lobby went out. The emergency lighting kicked in after 2 seconds, casting everything in a dim red glow. My computer was still running on battery backup, the screens providing the only real light. I could hear footsteps now, slow and deliberate, coming from the direction of the first floor hallway. Not from the elevator, but from the corridor that led to Diana Morrison's room. I gripped the bat tighter and moved toward the hallway, every instinct screaming at me to run, but knowing I couldn't leave Diana or the other guests in danger. As I reached the corner, I saw him at the far end of the hallway, trying Diana's door handle. She must have heard it because I heard her voice from inside, asking who was there. He didn't answer, just kept slowly turning the handle, testing it. I shouted at him to step away from the door, and he turned to look at me. In the red emergency lighting, his face looked completely blank, no expression at all, like a mannequin. He started walking toward me with that same measured pace, and I raised the bat, yelling that the police were on their way. He stopped about 10 feet from me and tilted his head slightly, like a dog hearing a strange sound. Then he spoke, and his voice was different now, no longer flat but almost melodic, rehearsed. "You should have minded your own business. Check in, check out, that's all you needed to do." He reached into his jacket and I swung the bat without thinking, pure adrenaline taking over. I missed him completely, but it made him step back. We stood there for what felt like hours but was probably seconds. And then I heard the beautiful sound of sirens approaching. His head snapped toward the front entrance, and without another word, he turned and ran. Not that measured walk anymore, but a full sprint toward the side exit. I ran after him, still carrying the bat, and saw him disappear into the woods just as the police cars screeched into our parking lot. They found him 3 hours later, hiding in a drainage pipe about a mile away, still carrying his black duffel bag filled with cleaning supplies, zip ties, and a collection of hotel key cards from different chains. Turns out his real name was Vincent Garrett, and he'd been a night janitor at a hotel chain for 15 years before they laid him off. The police said he'd developed an obsession with hotel cleanliness and had some twisted idea about purifying hotels of solo female travelers he deemed unworthy of the rooms. He'd been using stolen master key cards and employee access codes he'd collected over the years, which explained how he got into those other hotels without forcing entry. The FBI linked him to 5 murders across 3 states, all along major interstate routes. Diana Morrison was safe, though she was pretty shaken up when she learned how close she'd come to being victim number 6. I quit the Sunset Lodge 2 months later, not because I was scared, but because I couldn't walk those hallways without seeing him standing there in that unnatural way. Frank understood, gave me a good reference, and I work at a bookstore downtown now. Sometimes I'd drive past the lodge and see new people working the night shift through the window, and I wonder if they know what almost happened there. I never told the full story to anyone except the police, and now you folks here. I still have nightmares sometimes about that empty elevator dinging in the lobby, but at least I know he's serving multiple life sentences without parole. They never did figure out how he made the lights go out that night, but honestly, I don't want to know. I had been staying at a mid-range hotel during a work trip, the kind of place with beige carpets that always smelled faintly like lemon cleaner no matter the hour. At the time, I was juggling long shifts and trying to prepare a presentation, so most evenings I'd return exhausted, just grateful that the bed was made and fresh towels were waiting. The housekeeper on my floor was a woman named Marlene. She wasn't chatty, but she had this habit of humming softly while pushing her cart, a tune I never recognized but always seemed to repeat itself day after day. It became part of the background of my stay, almost comforting in a strange way. The last evening before things went bad, I came back later than usual, close to midnight. The hallway lights buzzed like they hadn't been replaced in years, and the air felt heavy, like the AC wasn't circulating properly. Marlene's cart was parked outside one of the corner rooms, but she wasn't there. I thought it was odd since housekeeping usually wrapped up hours earlier, but I figured maybe someone requested extra service. Her cart looked messy, bottles of cleaner tipped over, rags half hanging out of the bag. I didn't see her, so I kept walking, but the image stuck with me longer than I expected. The next morning, the lobby had this uneasy energy. Guests whispered at the check-in desk, and staff moved faster than usual, heads down, avoiding eye contact. When I asked the front desk about late checkout, the clerk gave me a distracted nod, like she hadn't actually heard what I said. Then I caught something unusual. Two men in suits, not guests, heading toward the service hallway with a manager trailing behind. Their shoes clicked loudly on the tile, and the sound carried until a door shut behind them. That was when the rumor started circling. Marlene hadn't shown up for her shift, and nobody knew where she was. Later that afternoon, police cars pulled up out front. Their presence was impossible to ignore, flashing lights painting the lobby walls in red and blue. Word spread fast. Blood had been found in the back hallway, near the service area where the carts were kept. Someone said it wasn't a small spill either, but a streak that smeared along the wall, as if something had been dragged. People gathered near the elevators, speculating in low voices. But when I asked one of the staff if Marlene was okay, she looked at me for a long moment and just said, "Go back to your room." That answer didn't sit right with me at all. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept picturing her abandoned cart, the bottles rattling when I walked by. Around 3 a.m., I went down to grab a soda from the vending machine near the stairwell. On my way back, I noticed a section of the service hallway taped off with yellow police tape. No one was guarding it, but the silence there was suffocating, like even the hum of the ice machine cut out when I got close. I didn't linger. I practically jogged back to my room. By the next morning, the police presence had doubled. Guests waiting for rides stood by the entrance, clutching their luggage like they couldn't get away fast enough. That's when I overheard two officers near the front desk asking about a guest who had checked out at dawn. Apparently, he'd left in such a hurry that he skipped breakfast, rushed past the night clerk, and barely signed his name on the slip. The oddest part was his rental car, still sitting in the lot, keys on the driver's seat, door unlocked. Nobody could explain why he'd leave it like that. Later in the day, while waiting for my ride to the airport, I passed near the maintenance door and glimpsed one of the detectives speaking with the manager. The detective held a clipboard and kept pointing toward the hallway where the blood was found. The manager looked pale, nodding quickly but saying nothing. I wanted to ask, but before I could, the detective's eyes flicked toward me, and I immediately looked away, pretending to fuss with my phone. Something about his stare made it clear guests weren't supposed to know more than we already did. When I finally checked out, the woman at the desk barely spoke. She slid the receipt toward me without looking up, her nails drumming the counter. Behind her, I noticed Marlene's name tag sitting alone in a tray, the plastic cracked like it had been tossed carelessly. That detail stuck with me more than anything else, like a quiet admission that she wasn't coming back. As my cab pulled away, I glanced at the rental car still in the lot, baking under the sun, the windshield catching the light. The sight left me with more questions than answers, and I knew I'd never look at hotel hallways the same way again. A week after I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I tried searching the local news, but all I found were vague headlines. Investigation ongoing at downtown hotel. And authorities tight-lipped after incident. No mention of Marlene by name, just a staff member. It bothered me, she wasn't just a staff member. She was a real person with a voice I could still hear in my head, humming that same repetitive tune. The anonymity made the whole thing feel even darker, like she had been erased. Months later, curiosity got the better of me. I called the hotel pretending I was looking to book again, hoping maybe they'd slip some detail. The woman on the phone hesitated when I asked if Marlene still worked there. She said quietly, "We don't have anyone by that name," and then rushed to transfer me to reservations. It was the way she said it, clipped and final, like a door slamming shut. I didn't push further. I knew I wouldn't get answers that way. The part that still gnaws at me is the rental car. I read online that it stayed in the lot for weeks before the company finally towed it. People speculated the man who checked out left on foot or got picked up by someone. Nobody could understand why he'd abandoned the car like that. It feels connected, too connected to ignore. The timing, the blood, Marlene disappearing the same night he left, it all lines up too neatly. I still travel for work, but I'll never forget that hotel. Every time I walk past a housekeeping cart now, I catch myself scanning for the person behind it, listening for that soft humming that became so familiar. I've learned that sometimes the scariest things don't happen in abandoned buildings or dark forests. They happen in bright hallways where you least expect it. I'll never know what really happened to Marlene, but one thing I'm certain of, something terrible unfolded behind those service doors, and it wasn't just an accident.